We are live streaming, so we are good to go. Click on my button. Thank you for joining the October meeting of the Southern Nevada Strong Steering Committee. A few things to remember for those on the line. Please mute and unmute yourself. If we hear background noises, staff will mute your line. This meeting is being recorded. Madam Chairwoman, staff is ready for you to begin the meeting.
Thank you, Maren, and good afternoon. This is Chairwoman Deborah March for the record. I'd like to call this meeting to order, the October 29th, 2020 meeting of the Southern Nevada Strong Steering Committee. RTC staff will begin with a roll call of committee members, introduce staff online, and also touch on a few housekeeping items. Maren?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Mayor Dubois, Management Analyst for the RTC for the record. I will call out the names of those that are confirmed on the line, as well as those that are present in the room. If you do not hear your name, please speak up at the end. Okay, so I have Mayor Deborah March here in the room. We have Nancy Amundsen in the room. She is representing Clark County. Then we have we have Shane Hammerman. I almost skipped you, sorry, Shane. Shane is in the room. He is representing Conservation District of Southern Nevada. We have Nicole Bungham on the line, representing the Southern Nevada Health District. We have Mike Casey on the line, representing Clark County School District. We have Lisa Corrado in the room. She is representing the City of Henderson. We have Dylan Goldberg on the line, City of North Las Vegas. We have Jim Keene, representing City of Boulder City on the line. We have Councilman Brian Knudsen, representing the Southern Nevada Regional Planning Coalition, in person in the room. We have Dane Marshall on the line, representing the Las Vegas Valley Water District. We have Ms. MJ Maynard, representing the RTC on WebEx. And we have Ms. Sandra Rosenberg, representing the Nevada Department of Transportation via WebEx. Mr. Robert Summerfield, representing City of Las Vegas via WebEx. And Mr. Chad Williams, Southern Nevada Regional Housing Authority on WebEx. Additionally, we have a few RTC staff. And we just had Robert Fielden join us. If you want, you can come sit up next to the mic. He just joined us in person.
That's Ken McDonald.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ken McDonald, sorry. It's Matt, so I can't tell. I can't tell who's what anymore.
I'm in disguise too, so it's okay.
Lisa, everybody should see Lisa. She is dressed up for Halloween. Thank you, Lisa, for being our representative of the month. Okay, so Ken McDonald is also here. Then we have on the line staff-wise, we have, Mr. Craig Rayborn, Director of the MPO, is here present in the room. We have Ms. Ray Lathrop, Manager of Regional Planning, who is on the line. Ms. Michelle Laramie, Senior Regional Planner, on the line. And Mr. Paul Gully, Management Analyst, who is on the line. And then my teammate here is Mr. David Gloria, Management Analyst, and he is assisting me with all things technical. As the chairwoman mentioned, I have a few housekeeping items to go over. Please be sure to state your name for the record before speaking so that anyone in the room or on the line can tell who is speaking. Voting will be done verbally as a group, calling for ayes and nays. If there are no nays or abstentions, then the motion will carry. If there are nays, then a roll call vote will be required. In the event of a roll call vote, please wait for your name to be read to provide your vote. The chairwoman will call for any comments or questions after an item has been presented. And finally, staff encourages participation from committee members. So those that are on the WebEx, there is a feature to raise your hand and chat on there. Go ahead and use those, and we'll try to monitor to interrupt to get you a chance to speak. Please note that the chat feature is shared with the viewing public as well as those connected via WebEx. So you can also unmute yourself as needed. We ask that you return to mute when you are done speaking to minimize the amount of background noise. Thank you to everybody for participating in our meeting, and I will turn it back to you, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you, Maren. This is the first time set aside to conduct citizen participation. The time is limited on items to be included to include items on the agenda. Do we have anyone in the audience wishing to make a comment on something on the agenda? Seeing no one, we'll go ahead. Is there anyone outside that's viewing?
Mayor, we do not have any public comments in our inbox right now. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go ahead and close the public participation. Mary? Oh, okay, so you, okay, I saw that there was script in here.
Yeah, we don't have any,
Okay,
we don't have any public comments.
thank you. Next is, on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the July 30th, 2020 steering committee. Are there any comments or questions from the committee members on minutes? Is there anyone online that wishes to comment? Can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
We have a motion on the floor. All in favor signify by, I guess it will be an aye.
Aye.
And
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
is there anyone opposed? Okay, that motion passes. The next item on the agenda is to receive an update on the regional work program. Mr. Rayburn?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Craig Rayborn, Director of the Metropolitan Planning Organization, for the record. So this next item is to receive an update on our regional work program. And for this item, I'm going to have Manager of Regional Planning, Ray Lathrop, handle this item.
Ray?
Thank you. Awesome. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, great. All right, thank you, Chair and Committee. Ray Lathrop for the record. Today, I will be providing an update on the regional planning team and our activities related to regional plan administration, as well as the research projects that we have going underway at this point. So the next slide will list the tasks associated with our regional plan administration. Today, we'll be talking a little bit about progress and tracking, as well as the update as it relates to our opportunity site strategies. So first, related to tracking the progress of the plan, over the last month, mostly in September, Craig and I met with each of you as our agency partners and steering committee members. We've always connected with everyone one-on-one in the late summer and fall to kind of assess progress and talk about what activities are prioritized in your work. This year, we framed the discussion around two important factors. The regional plan was adopted 5 years ago, and most of our partners have been on the front lines of emergency response for the pandemic, or you've faced drastic impacts of your work due to the economic and health crisis. So we hope that discussion wasn't too scary for most of you. It was actually a really nice chance for us to connect and hear about your work. And we're continually impressed with the resiliency of our community and with all of you and the great work that you guys are doing every day. As it pertains to the regional plan, we're really hopeful to collect your feedback over the next few weeks. Last week, I sent out a spreadsheet that was a little bit complicated. If anyone has been able to kind of open it, we'd be happy to kind of talk through it with everyone. But we're really excited about the opportunity to gather your input as far as what are your priorities and what is progress on implementation of the plan. We will create a summary of those responses and then share those with you soon, as well as ideas on how our team can provide some assistance or also connect you guys to each other if you guys are working on the same types of activities. So just a really quick first glance on the next slide. There are a few themes that emerged during our discussion. Housing is a priority for everybody, and at this point, there's a lot of different programs, policies, and ideas floating around as far as how to create more housing and how to create equitable access to housing. And so we'll be looking at some of that stuff as it relates to our existing research and then in the future. Also, sustainability planning and heat impacts. We're doing some research on this right now, but we understand that everyone's kind of talking through how they can create plans for climate action and environmental sustainability. So we'll look at other ways that we can be supporting that work on the regional level. Transit investment and transportation access was a big conversation from all of our partners, especially as it pertains to the idea around complete communities and spurring transit-oriented development. So we want to make sure we're supportive of everyone in our role here as the core administrator as well as the MPO. And finally, regional collaboration continues to be a priority for all of our partners, ensuring that we can align across the Valley and looking at how we improve our relationships in order to be really successful on plan implementation. So as we gather additional feedback from everyone over the next couple of weeks, we will kind of compile all of that into one document and make sure to share it out so that in 2021 we can be just as effective in our support for you. Next, I'm going to pass it to Michelle Laramie to give you an update on the opportunity site update done for downtown North Las Vegas.
Hi, so yeah, as you'll recall, we've been working on conducting, oh, sorry, thought I heard someone jumping in. We've been working on conducting a progress update to each of our 4 Southern Nevada Strong opportunity sites. And hopefully you'll remember we began this process with the downtown North Las Vegas opportunity site, and we're now nearing completion of this report. So we anticipate providing you with a full presentation of this report at our next steering committee meeting. We are still waiting on some final comments and small revisions from North Las Vegas, so the report isn't quite ready to share yet. But we did want to kind of give you a quick overview. Now that we've completed the report, we have a nice template that we'll be using to guide the remaining 3 opportunity site updates that we're working on. And as you can see here, the bulk of the report was presented in these following 4 sections. So the vision section helped to provide an overview of the vision for downtown North Las Vegas and kind of synthesized previous planning efforts and vision components into a concise, condensed section. The progress section, of course, provided an evaluation of the progress made on the specific implementation strategies that were created for downtown North Las Vegas. Recommendations looked at updating those implementation strategies. And then case study section is where we dove in to some additional research and provided some examples around specific challenges that we had discussed with the City of North Las Vegas staff, where some more research might be helpful. Next slide, please. So once the report is complete, we'll be presenting it to our various RTC committees for approval. And we do anticipate this happening very quickly in the next month or so. So like I said, we should be bringing this report to you at our next meeting in January. And we'll also be working with the City of North Las Vegas to have the report accepted by their redevelopment agency through an updated resolution, since the original implementation strategies report was adopted through a resolution by their RDA in 2015. And with this report basically done now, we have begun working on 2 of the 3 remaining opportunity sites. We've met with both the City of Henderson and the City of Las Vegas for the Boulder Highway site and the Las Vegas Medical District site. And we've begun working through some of the preliminary sections on these progress reports as well. Primarily, we'll be focusing on our literature review and our existing conditions, which will help inform the vision and the progress sections. And then we'll go through our evaluation matrix. And once we kind of have all that information, we'll touch back our jurisdictions and kind of evaluate how to tackle the rest of the report. We also expect to move through this preliminary work pretty quickly, and we'll likely have some information to present to you on Boulder Highway and the Las Vegas Medical District sites in January as well. And then for the Maryland Parkway site, we are waiting until the transit-oriented development study is a little closer to completion before beginning our evaluation of that site. So we anticipate starting that sometime next year once these next two reports are done. And back to you, Ray.
Thank you. We are also going to provide a short update on some of the regional planning research that we've been doing. We've been working kind of concurrently on several of these research projects. We have yet to start the tree canopy one, but we will provide a full update on housing and heat. Just a note, the inventory of regional sustainability planning tools and techniques will actually be a separate agenda item after this update, because we do have a draft kind of final report to present, and so we'll do that separately. So next slide. For the future housing inventory and needs, our team has, since we last talked, met with a technical advisory group, and that is made up of planners, community development representatives, and some of our social service departments within our local jurisdictions. We've had a really robust discussion about the existing data that's available, both historical data as well as forecast data on population and housing inventory. And we had a very lengthy discussion around the pertinent and relevant questions that our region is really trying to understand, as well as kind of the deliverables that will be able to provide our local agencies the best tools for them to move forward in planning for housing. We're now reaching out to each of the technical advisory group members in order to understand the data that exists in each of the jurisdictions, make sure that we really fully understand what we're working with. And so we will have a probably additional report in January. At this point, we've really just kind of started the housing inventory and worked a lot on some existing literature and other plans that peer communities have kind of looked into. And we had yet to really kind of understand exactly all the levels of detail that we need to kind of embark on as we move this plan forward. But stay tuned. We have a lot of very interesting information that we are excited to share probably in the next meeting. For the extreme heat and vulnerability study, I'm going to kick it over to Paul Gully, who will, in the next slide, oh, there's animation, who will talk a little bit about how that research is going. Paul?
Great, thanks, Ray. Can you guys hear me okay with my mask on?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Paul Gully for the record. As Ray just mentioned, I'm going to quickly run through some progress we've made on this extreme heat vulnerability analysis since our last steering committee meeting. And as a reminder, the goals of the initial phase of this project are really to identify concentrations of people who may be at greater risk during extreme heat events. And if you recall, our analysis is really built around the fact that there are three components or dimensions to extreme heat vulnerability. And we know that especially in a region like ours, everyone can be impacted by and is susceptible during extreme heat events to some extent. But these impacts aren't necessarily evenly distributed. So certain communities will be particularly affected based on levels of exposure, adaptive capacity, so their ability to prepare for or cope with extreme heat, and then sensitivity to exposure. Next slide. So these were the indicators we settled on after our initial round of research, which included looking at academic studies, federal guidance, looking at what other cities and regions had done, and then talking with local stakeholders and experts. Next slide. And then we made some updates based on input we received from our technical advisory group through a survey we distributed following our first TAG meeting a few months ago. And after we settled on these indicators, we were able to finalize our methodology, kind of prepare and process all of the data, and then perform our spatial analysis, which took, as you can imagine, quite a deal of work, and I do want to acknowledge Grant Schertz, who is on our modeling team in the MPO. He's been a huge help, especially with the spatial analysis. Next slide. And so this is what the results of the spatial analysis look like. So for each of the 18 indicators that were just on the previous slide, we performed a grid cell analysis and then did some data scaling and standardization to get composite maps for each of the 3 dimensions: exposure, adaptability, and sensitivity. And then we essentially add the 3 together, and that gives us our composite extreme heat vulnerability map, which is the one on the far right. Next slide. And here's kind of a closer look at that composite map. And so what this shows you is the darker purple areas are the highest scoring in the region. These are where we would expect there to be concentrations, populations who, again, are most vulnerable or at risk during extreme heat events. And these, again, might be areas where we might want to focus resources or potentially develop some targeted interventions in the future. And this also isn't to imply that the green or yellow areas aren't at risk. The purple ones are just the ones that are most vulnerable or most at risk. Next slide. And so we recently received some heat-related death and hospitalization data by zip code from the health district. And we were able to overlay this data with our analysis. So what you're seeing here is sorry, it looks like we jumped ahead a bit. Perfect, right there. So what you're seeing here, the white areas are hot spots identified in our analysis, and then the yellow, orange, and red areas are zip codes where there have been the highest number of heat-related deaths over the past decade. And you can definitely see, at least kind of informally, visually, there does seem to be some spatial correlation between our results and then the actual data that's been recorded, which is definitely what we were hoping to see with our analysis. Next slide. And then similarly, this is the results of our analysis with heat-related hospitalizations overlaid. Next slide. And so what are our next steps? We just held our second technical advisory group meeting earlier this week to kind of go through all of this information. So we plan on having further discussions with our TAG members, give them a little more time to review the maps and our methodology. We're also going to be starting the process of creating interactive web maps. So it'll make looking at all of this data more, a lot easier for our partners, and also allow users to kind of drill down to the neighborhood level. We also want to spend a little more time investigating the highest scoring areas, so developing neighborhood profiles. So we intend to reach out to planners in all of the jurisdictions to get them to help us inform these profiles and give us a better sense of what things look like on the ground, and then maybe even start brainstorming possible interventions or programs that might help address some of the underlying vulnerabilities or conditions in the areas. And we will also be working to finalize a draft summary report, and then at future TAG meetings, we plan to kind of shift the discussion to focus a little more on mitigation strategies or a more coordinated approach at the regional level to addressing this issue. I think that is it on my end.
Yep. Thanks, Paul, and thank you, Michelle. That is actually the full update for the regional planning team. Does anyone have any questions?
Are there questions of anyone in the room or anyone online with regards to the work program update? I have a couple of things. Oh, go ahead. A couple of things. I wanted to go back to the regional plan the policy plan administration, the slides, the initial slides of the charges and responsibilities. And I'm wondering, you have a technical working group that's looking at the heat island issues, but maybe we should be having a technical group that looks at the overall plan. That's something that took 3 years in the development of the plan through the process of input, and maybe there should be some representation from each of the municipalities in the county so that we're not just being interviewed by you all, but that we're actually at the table together, because I think there's value in hearing what some of the issues are that each other is dealing with, that maybe an ongoing conversation or at least a review on an occasional basis, I think might be valuable. That may create a little bit more work for you to have another technical committee, but I think it would be valuable in terms of the kinds of issues that we're dealing with as cities, and maybe there's value in us moving together jointly on some issues when we understand what each other is working on and maybe to solve.
So, Mayor, this is, for those on the line, this is Craig Rayborn, MPO Director. Yeah, that actually aligns very, very closely with what we're planning on doing with the results of that prioritization survey, where that's kind of almost like an informal first step towards being able to come up with implementation priorities that we can then really focus on what we want to help with. And so with the local agencies as well as with the other stakeholders, try to figure out what those priorities are. So once we know those, that very much seems like the logical next step for what to do.
And then I would hope that maybe there's some flexibility in it, in that maybe you identify, as the group is sitting together at the table, that they identify some additional topics or some modifications to topics that because of all of these people working together.
Yeah, exactly. That's the other element that will help feed into is the development of our. We do the Unified Planning Work Program that's traditionally just been the transportation part of the MPO, but we've also added these projects to our Unified Planning Work Program to do our regional planning function as well. And that means every year we have to come up with what the projects are going to be for the next year. And so having that group as well as the overall steering committee be able to feed into that will be very helpful. Yeah, absolutely.
Lisa, did you?
Yes, Lisa Corona, Stu Henderson. Ray, I think this is for you or anyone involved, maybe too. Can you just help me understand the urban heat island research and how that's similar or different or supporting the sustainability planning tools? Are those two separate initiatives, or can you help me understand those, how they relate to one another?
Yeah, actually, they were totally separate from each other. So the heat study is really looking at the demographic and environmental data that we have in order to locate the possibility and potential of not just localized kind of warming, but also where populations that might have higher risk involved in extreme heat events. So that was really, at this point, is kind of a geographic analysis around where we might see extreme heat and the risks related to health. And so we are going to continue working there in that space by really diving into each of those neighborhoods that had higher composite scores to understand the underlying factors that really contribute to that risk. Some of those really high density of vulnerability might be social considerations, or environmental considerations. And so we're only just at the beginning, I think, or maybe halfway through kind of that analysis, and then we'll come up with some potential, ideas around how the whole valley might be able to, kind of mitigate some of those issues. The sustainability inventory was really looking at other communities and academic and professional literature related to how communities plan for climate action or environmental sustainability. So that's really kind of and Michelle will dive into that next, really a report on how to approach planning, and kind of defines what kind of data can go into that, what kind of metrics and how those processes can go. So they're not entirely the same, but if the region was interested in solving for something related to that heat data, they could potentially follow the planning ideas that we've kind of reported on in the sustainability report. Does that make sense?
Thank you, Ray.
Yeah.
I did have another question, Mayor. If that's
Yes.
okay. Well, or also just, I guess it's how we can coordinate a little bit, because on the housing, first of all, I think these two topics are very relevant, and we're excited to work on them. I think there's a lot of strategies in the regional plan that can get us started, so wanting to connect back some of these initiatives back to the plan, these are related, so that people don't think, that the plan is old or outdated.
Oh,
These are
no, yeah.
strategies in the plan, that these are actually implementation actions, which I love, and we're supportive and want to work on them. As it relates to the housing topic, we have been in touch with and are working with the UNLV Boys School of Law on engaging Professor Nagai Kandell's law class on just kind of generally around housing. So they are, I don't know if you all have met with them yet. If he reached out to you, I've mentioned that you guys would be a great stakeholder as well to present to his class. But hoping to get some research out of that class on fair housing, inclusionary housing, regional coordination, and they're also interested in like a civil rights commission. Those were some of the topics that he structured for his class. And just because he knew that Henderson had done research on inclusionary housing, we also paid for housing market analysis with Jeremy Aguero in the recent last couple of years. So he knew that, and we kind of connected. So we've been working on that, but they would be a good partner, I'm guessing, as well, so that we don't replicate work, and they're looking at it from a different perspective, which is interesting too.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Yes, Brian.
Hey, Mark, thank you, and Ray, thanks for the presentation and to your team. I have a question about, and I don't know if you can answer this or not, but I'm curious as a region if we've cataloged the resources that are committed to resolving some of the issue areas that you identified in your report or other SNS goals. If there's a catalog of what resources we have and what are going towards it and what's missing.
Report card and other things. Ray?
Yeah, every year we do the annual sort of check-in with all the stakeholders to measure progress. I think this is really this effort that we're undertaking right now is really the first step. I mean, there's so much that we're going to learn, or at least we think there's so much that we're going to learn from from this prioritization, this sort of status survey that we're doing with all of the local agencies as well as the other stakeholders, that, like I said, it sort of starts leading to an implementation plan. It sort of starts leading to understanding what tools or needs there are, so kind of that gap assessment sort of in the capacity to implement. And that's really, I think, one of the other important elements to it. And it's something that, as that gets completed, we'll start knowing more, I think, about what those steps are, so that we can identify if there are pieces that are missing, or things that have just been dropped that we shouldn't. I mean, like we may be thinking, oh, we've got to focus. I know that some members of the steering committee have chastised me for continually pointing out that there are 300 plus individual strategies.
Yeah, you keep doing it.
What that can lead to is us focusing on things that may not really be relevant to the entire valley or to a plurality or majority of the people that are working on implementing Southern Nevada Strong. And so this tool, this process that we're going through right now will really help us with that, and then really help us it logically leads to developing implementation strategies and plans. It also logically leads to identifying what the shortcomings are. And that's
And I think it's a really good point, and for this group in particular to think about, and I still drawn back to the AB 73 committee, and I know that has nothing to do with it, but it's very much aligned around housing and the strategies related to the homeless population. So as a gap of $900 million in Southern Nevada, if we know what that gap is, at least we know what we're going after, and we're trying to figure out what the solutions are. So the cataloging of resources and available dollars or available funding strategies to resolve some of the issues that we're talking about, move this past the talking phase, past the planning phase into who's doing what and who has the resources to do it.
Yeah, I think it would be fair to say that one of the harder challenges for us in administering the plan has been figuring out what activities to undertake, specifically in the building capacity for implementation fast. And so we've done what we think has been appropriate, but we haven't really had that ability to assess. And like the development of those kind of, we've done a lot of sort of inward-looking things, like regional focus things, like where are we on this? But it hasn't yet been, so what are the things we can add? When I say we, I don't mean the RTC, and I don't necessarily mean the steering committee, but what are the things that can be added to addressing the other themes in the plan? And I think that, yeah, what you're describing is exactly like the path that we're on. One of the upcoming steps or elements of the path that we're on right now.
The question that I had, and I thank you very much for jumping in. The question that I have is and Robert Sommerfeld, I think, is on the line, and I don't want to put him on the spot, but if he does want to jump in, it's the connection between the planning process and for the municipalities, the public works process. Because a lot of this is really infrastructure investment, and changing your planning requires changing infrastructure investment. So at the city, that's going to take me a little time to realize you can do a whole bunch on the planning side if you're not corresponding with your public works and other functions related to those planning changes, then it becomes a map. Maps are great, but you have to make significant investments on things that people can touch and feel.
Your capital improvements, 10-year plan, so they're talking 10 years out, things that Public Works is planning for. But I still believe that planning is foundational to capital improvement and Public Works, but you're right, we all need to be at the table looking forward and planning forward. And that may be why it may be appropriate to bring some people together as a technical committee and to have those conversations about what those priorities need to be. And maybe then that conversation goes on to making sure we're updating our CIPs so that they meet what we're looking to do in our future.
And I'll just add that too. I think there are really good models for how to go about starting to do that more. And most of the people on this call have been watching us as an MPO on the transportation side start to incorporate, it's a gradual process, but we're starting to incorporate performance measures into our planning process. And that will, for those of you who have public works departments and work with public works departments, that will start to influence the projects that we can include in our regional transportation plan. The ability of a project to achieve something that we have identified through the planning process is a federal requirement now for spending federal money. And that model, it may not work the same way at the local level. It may not be appropriate to work the same way at the local level. But that model of a framework where you set your goals and then you measure the things that you're going to do against that, or the things that you would like to do through infrastructure and capital projects, that's a viable model that can work with a variety of different ways in which you know, sort of connect the two. So that's certainly something also, yes, again, we're here to help anyone, but I think you're right, Mayor, that that idea of starting to form a working group that kind of pulls those discussions into smaller groups focused on that would be real helpful.
I think it is very similar to what your process has been for us as well, and to Councilman Kinsman's point on those resources. A lot of times we need to change the way we're doing, and we may not need new resources. We probably do need new resources as well, but we're going through a code update right now. The CIP is a good example. There's other initiatives that we could be directing if there's some ideas. Sometimes we just don't have that research in those cases. It's handy to know how do we address FDI island effect in, an older neighborhood where our code standards back in those days were different, and we didn't have the requirements for open space. And so how do we retrofit some of these communities? So I think it's a combination of finding new resources, but also changing the way we do things to align with these new problems that we're facing.
Any questions or comments? Anyone who's online have a question or comment? Okay, we'll go ahead. This doesn't require action, so we'll go ahead item. Craig,
Yes.
give us an update to receive a presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, so this is a presentation of the Sustainability Planning Tools and Techniques Report. For this item, I'm going to let our Senior Regional Planner, Michelle Laramie, this slide.
Okay, thank you, Craig. So today we're doing our final presentation actually of the Regional Environmental Sustainability Report that we've been working on. And as we just kind of talked about, this was part of our regional planning work program that we approved earlier this year. And the focus here was to develop an inventory of planning processes and best practices for environmental sustainability, or kind of interchangeably used in the report, climate action planning. So we have been giving pretty frequent updates on this project over this last year. So I'm going to move pretty fast through the information today, and then we'll look to focus on any final questions or comments you might have at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. So this slide presents an overview of our process for this project. And again, we've gone through the details of our process in the past, but I did want to take just a moment to highlight some final key phases, I guess, of this project that we recently worked through. So we did present multiple drafts of this report to a technical advisory group for review. And we used their feedback to inform some additional research that went into the report. And then we also used their feedback in general, and we just incorporated some of their comments and additional information into our final report that's included in the backup for you. So after we put together the final draft that went through our technical advisory group, we also met with each individual of that group, as well as some additional stakeholders individually, to go through the findings of the report and to provide an opportunity for some candid feedback and questions, and a last opportunity to kind of get anything in there that may have been inadvertently missed or overlooked on our part. So overall, from these discussions, we had very positive comments shared with us about the report and its usefulness for the region. And all of our TAG members did share that they felt their feedback was reflected well in our final report and our findings. So ultimately, as you'll see in your backup material, we did produce a few different final deliverables. First is the key findings report, which is a brief high-level overview of our findings. Next is a full report, which is more robust and dives into some of the academic literature around environmental sustainability planning. And it also highlights some of the specific examples we heard from our interviews we had with peer communities as we discussed how this work was happening in other cities and regions. And lastly, the appendices, they provide a comparison of some of the different plans we reviewed as part of this project, as well as a decision tree for thinking through what type of approach towards sustainability planning might be most appropriate as this work moves forward here in Southern Nevada. Next slide. So ultimately, we believe these materials can be helpful in approaching environmental sustainability moving forward in the region. As you'll hear as we go through the findings, there's no prescribed actions that we're recommending, but as the need for environmental sustainability planning becomes more of a priority for us in our region, the report is really meant to be a tool that can provide everyone with some foundational information of the ways in which this work can or could be approached in the future, either individually as jurisdictions or together in a more collaborative environment. So the project also did help to advance several of the Southern Nevada Strong regional planning goals and strategies. Most directly, the report provides insight, best practices, and examples for how other regions have worked together to collaborate around environmental sustainability planning. And this information, of course, can help us build capacity and enhance collaboration here around similar regional issues. And indirectly, as this work, environmental sustainability planning, does begin to move forward, however that may look, the work will, of course, support sustainability goals that are found in the plan, such as reducing greenhouse gas emissions through reduced vehicle miles traveled, or through more efficient land use, are just some of the examples of some of the sustainability goals found in the plan. Next slide. So our primary findings of this research are presented in two main parts. The first is the different approaches that cities and regions are taking towards this work. And the second is a review of best practices for environmental sustainability planning. And we've discussed these various findings in the past, so I won't go into too much detail here. But I did want to just kind of highlight that while our research does emphasize the need to adopt multi-jurisdictional collaborative approaches to environmental sustainability work, our research also finds that there are a lot of different ways that this is happening in other communities and many different ways that this work can look. Each community that we interviewed had their own approach towards collaboration. And for the most part, that collaborative work is still pretty new in many of the communities that we spoke to. We found also that their collaborative work is somewhat limited in scope. Regions were coming together on areas where they had shared goals, such as emergency preparedness and resiliency, but they weren't necessarily tackling the whole spectrum of issues that can fall under environmental sustainability planning. Instead, they were really focused on building some early successes and some momentum to keep collaborating in the future. Next slide. We've also, like I said, discussed our best practice findings, but we've since, in the final report, refined these ideas into 12 principles that fall within 3 broad categories for best practice. And generally, these best practices, they highlight the need to determine achievable and measurable goals and strategies, as well as in the importance of creating performance-based implementation and evaluation processes for moving your environmental sustainability plans forward. The best practices also focus on the need for broad and inclusive community engagement where equity and environmental justice are centered in the work. That was really a big focus for the technical advisory group and for some of our stakeholder conversations, highlighting where that comes into the work. And not surprisingly, we also found that the work really needs to communicate how it reflects the community's vision for quality of life and how moving sustainability efforts forward and implementing these plans can really positively contribute to the community's vision for the future. Next slide. And lastly, we also provide some general recommendations that came directly out of our literature review. These recommendations are somewhat typical and expected. They're typical of what you find in planning literature for improving multi-jurisdictional collaborative planning efforts across a variety of issues nationwide. So such recommendations, they include aligning plans with regional and state goals, which helps to increase funding competitiveness, prioritizing federal and state funding for plans that progress federal and state goals at the local level. The recommendations also include ideas around increasing collaboration with non-government organizations and the private sector, and developing incentives that increase participation from those organizations in meeting state and regional goals as well. So the full list of recommendations, it's included in our conclusion of the report, and they're really just some additional things to keep in mind as conversations around environmental sustainability continue to happen and progress here in the region and also in the state. So moving forward with this work, we're now presenting the report to our various committees here at the RTC, and we expect to complete this approval process by the end of the year. So because this project is part of our regional planning work program and part of our UPWP process, the project will go before our RTC board for final consent. And then once we complete that process, we'll be publishing everything on our website so that it's easily accessible for everyone to download and share throughout the region as necessary. So that really concludes my presentation of our report. I'm happy to answer any questions or hear any additional comments you might have.
Are there questions or comments here in the room? Nancy?
Hi, Nancy Emerson of Clark County. Thank you, Michelle, for working on this. I know that you worked with our Department of Environment and Sustainability. Right now, the county has an initiative that we are working on the sustainability plan as well as the climate action plan. We have consultants working on that. In addition, those consultants are working with our consultants in the Department of Comprehensive Planning on our Transform Clark County, which is our complete rewrite of our master plan and rewrite of our zoning code. So we're trying to make sure that sustainability is a large component, and we're working hand in hand with the Department of Environment and Sustainability on that. And I know that you have worked with them, and you've also worked with us on this report, so thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or comments in the room, or on Lisa?
Question. So the outcome of this effort is just trying to explain the different ways to go about sustainability planning, and then are we to choose and then move forward on the next phase? Like the sum of the parts or the collaborative, more collaborative approach, are we being asked to choose which approach we want to go with, or try to merge them under the Clark County plan?
So really the goal of this, again, Craig Rayborn with RTC, really the goal of this was to identify the approaches that are out there so that there could be a way to articulate the approach that the region, if the region chooses to develop a regional approach to sustainability or climate action planning, for us to have gone through that process. There is no next step there are next steps that could be taken, but there is no next step that has been asked of us, or has been agreed to or anything like that. It's just, we're basically trying to get the research out, get the ideas out there for that discussion. And I will just add that in our meetings with all of the local agencies, there has been, I would say general agreement, general encouragement that there should be something else that comes from this. But at the moment, we're not saying, oh, this is what has to be. We're trying to get the idea out there, sort of fulfilling that kind of think tank role that we've been trying to also start supporting for the region.
Any other questions or comments, Nancy?
So Nancy Emerson again from Clark County. The one thing to keep in mind is our Department of Environment Sustainability. This report is actually being done, or this study, these reports, these plans are being done for Clark County. That department also is in charge of the Desert Conservation Program as well as air quality, which are both county-wide programs. They're separate. The county is not doing it to try to push it down anybody's throat. It's just that our Board of County Commissioners was very interested in the county starting down the road of climate action and sustainability. That is why it's in that department.
Anyone else online that wishes to speak? I guess I would like to say one thing. This is Deborah March representing the RTC chair. When we first started out with Southern Nevada Strong, we talked about creating tools, and some of the tools in the toolbox could be mapping. So if there's things that are going on, for example, in the county that the county recognizes, or Henderson is doing some things, and maybe we decide that one of the things we measure is where we have complete streets, that we put those on a map, and maybe at some point this mapping tool could have an overlay so that as we're looking at the community, we can be looking at things that are working together, that there's connectivity where Henderson might be working on something that can connect to what the county is doing, and and then on up to the city. So maybe we can look at an element being how we support mapping so that we can tell our story to others who might be coming to us to talk about what we're doing here.
One more thing, Mayor.
Lisa?
Yeah, thank you. So the idea that there's just two options, that you either do the sum of the parts or a more collaborative approach, I think there's some in between there, because some agencies that participate are regional agencies, and the cities, we are not. And so we have purview over certain things that can contribute to things, positive changes to climate action and reducing GHG emissions. So I think there should be a regional framework, and there should be some analysis done that helps us see what types of things would have the biggest bang for our buck or the biggest impact, and then we each kind of evaluate where are we at with those things in our own municipal operations. Some of us may be further along on one thing and a little behind on something else, and then looking at that, that's kind of how I see our collaboration going generally with Southern Nevada Strong, is understanding what the issues are, and then how do they apply to each of our communities and where we're at in our own maturity on each of those subjects. And so we certainly want to engage in this, on this topic as well. If there's an opportunity and you need comments back on that draft, if there's still an opportunity, we can review that in more detail. I know we've had staff go to a couple of meetings, but there's a draft document. If there's an opportunity for more comments, we can get that to you. But I just wanted to put that out there. I think there's something in the middle that the regional entities will have a little bit of a different role to play in addition to the cities.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's really, those are sort of the two extremes, and then and they exist on kind of a spectrum for how this happens. But really, the sum of approach is this idea that each entity kind of is doing their own plan. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're all just the local entities. It could be, it could be almost every stakeholder that's part of Southern Nevada Strong could be doing something potentially relating to sustainability or climate planning. And really what we're talking about is the two options of everyone kind of working independently and then trying to pull them together, regardless of the level and scale of the stakeholder, versus sort of everyone trying to convene and do this all sort of together. And they are kind of different approaches, but even then, there are going to be flavors and variations in how either of those approaches. And then, yes. So just to be clear, we welcome any comments as members review this. Our plan is to take this to the Metropolitan Planning Subcommittee, to take it now through the RTC's plan approval process that we have. And so we would take it to the Metropolitan Planning Subcommittee for them to review and approve it, and then it would go to EAC, and then it would go to the RTC board.
Any other questions, comments?
Yeah, this is Sandra from NDOT. Just as many of you are aware, there's also initiatives at the state level per SB 254 and the executive order. NDOT has been working with DCNR and the Governor's Office of Energy on the statewide climate strategy. And the first one of those will be out in December, but what the group has realized, and I think we already knew, is that it certainly needs a lot more work. This is kind of the setting the foundation, the framework. And in many of the categories of strategies, there's going to need to be a big role at the local and regional level, and the state and the region and the locals working together on some of the initiatives that were mentioned in here. So that's just sort of a heads up. I think many of you participated in the listening session, so you're already aware. And I want you to know the group heard you loud and clear in terms of the need for additional stakeholder engagement. So I just wanted to put that out for you guys, that the state, both NDOT as well as the other state agencies, are looking forward to these future steps of working with the regions and the locals in terms of these strategies that both meet the state GHG reduction targets, but also your local priorities.
Thank you, Sandra. Is there anyone else wishing to comment on this item? This is an action item, so I do need a motion to accept the report.
So moved.
you have a motion on the floor, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed, say nay. Sounds like a pass. The next item is to receive an update on the strategic visioning from the Southern Nevada Regional Planning Coalition.
Thank you, Chairwoman March. Again, Craig Rayborn, Director of the MPO at the RTC, for the record. As everyone knows, we administer the Southern Nevada Strong Regional Plan, obviously on behalf of the Southern Nevada Strong Steering Committee stakeholders and members, but also specifically sort of on behalf of the Southern Nevada Regional Planning Coalition. And so we've heard of the strategic visioning efforts that SNRPC has been going through for a number of years. Because of that sort of tight relationship between the plan and the SNRPC, we think it's pretty important that we try to keep up to date on what is going on with the SNRPC. And so we invited Councilman Knudsen to discuss the visioning and latest actions coming from the SNRPC.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Greg. Excuse me. So happy to take you through the thought process over the last year with the pandemic in the middle, which makes everything a little bit more complicated. So the thought process coming onto the board, at least the representatives who were from the city of Las Vegas beforehand, worked in conjunction with multiple other individuals from other jurisdictions to disband the SNRPC, really based on the thought that there was no real purpose or intent for the SNRPC and there was no forward momentum, there was no movement. The disbandment was left up to the city of Las Vegas as the organization that was staffing the SNRPC at the time. And so the attorneys and the planning staff associated with the SNRPC went through a variety of steps to figure out kind of how to disband. At the end of the day, they came up with a potential path forward, which would require essentially reneging on an interlocal agreement that each jurisdiction would have to approve eliminating that interlocal agreement. And there'd also need to be changes at the state level, so a legislator would have to actively work to not create a need for regional collaboration. And so at that point, I was appointed to the board. I think there's a lot of value and need for regional boards for things that are what we're talking about today, because there's very little structure in order for a lot of what we're talking about today to actually move forward if you need to find additional resources at the state or federal level. And the intent was really to identify where there's consensus amongst the jurisdictions to figure out how we move forward. Multiple conversations and 2 or 3 meetings later, we had a draft interlocal agreement that called for a few different things. One was changing the name to the Southern Nevada Council of Governments. The second was changing the funding formula, which allowed for a population-based funding formula as opposed to the current formula, which is pretty much split evenly amongst the jurisdictions. The other change would allow for hiring of a staff person. I think it's called out for in the draft interlocal as professional services or lobbyists, with the intent of bringing focus for our state or federal delegation to focus in on some key issues where there's consensus amongst each of the jurisdictions. So those were the significant changes. We've had 3 meetings where it was discussed. At the last meeting, which was on, my days are mixed up now. I think it was this week.
It was Tuesday this week.
Thank you. Tuesday of this week. That's sad. Wow. It was last week. It's been a long week. On Tuesday of this week, called for a vote, and there was a request from North Las Vegas and Henderson North Las Vegas request was for more time to evaluate the draft interlocal. Henderson, the number of issues that were brought up, and Lisa, you could probably help me summarize. But it was, and these are things that I think are consistent with the staff, is establishment of power, who has more power, who has less power, and how we figure that out. The identification of issues and when do we identify issues, how do we identify issues, and the timing of how you establish those issues and who can develop the work plan and the budget for following up on those issues. I think the biggest issue is around consensus and what does consensus look like from the jurisdictions. At the end of that meeting, we decided to table the item for a month to see if there's additional changes that the jurisdictions want to make to the interlocal. We also had a presentation from Southern Nevada Strong, and Craig did a great job, and as well as the Southern Nevada Forum, from representatives who could discuss what issues the Southern Nevada Forum had identified. There's a handful of things that have not yet been prioritized by the Southern Nevada Forum, but they discussed a number of things ranging from higher ed investment, Medicaid or medical infrastructure investment, child care and child care subsidies, housing, homelessness, and a variety of other issues. And then, Craig, your issues that you brought up were kind of mentioned in your first presentation. The individuals at the SNRPC meeting identified two consistent issues where there was a unanimous vote around heat islands as it relates to urban heat islands as it relates to climate change within Southern Nevada, similar to what Craig presented. Obviously a significant issue for our valley. And that was one issue that's consistent. The second issue has been, or was identified as the infrastructure for broadband technology or the allowance for online learning, online telehealth, online working, with the very clear indication that for much of our region, there's big pockets of no technology, no access to technology, and a conversation around should internet connectivity really be considered a utility at this point where government needs to be more engaged in a conversation about where it's available, where it's not available, and the other opportunities outside the private companies that really can control those networks. So moving forward, I honestly I think if it doesn't move forward in this form, there was a conversation, I think, from representatives around grants, looking at SNRPC as a grant. My thoughts or my conversation at the SNRPC meeting was this has been going on for multiple years now with people trying to figure out what the purpose or intent was. I don't think from Las Vegas we have any intent on trying to figure out what the intent or purpose is. And we would try to figure out a way to disband it if there's no agreement on the jurisdictions on moving forward. But there's a requirement to meet. We have to change something at the state level without a real intent to do something. That's where it becomes tricky with the Southern Nevada Strong and trying to figure out the connection of Southern Nevada Strong with a board who really doesn't feel connected to Southern Nevada Strong. So those are where we ended up. At the next meeting, I think we'll try to figure out if there's agreement on the interlocal, or if there's changes that need to be made to it, and hopefully there's something productive that comes out of the conversation. That would be my summary. Lisa or Mayor or anybody else that wants to chime in.
Nancy?
And prior to the meeting on Tuesday, last Tuesday, the Board of County Commissioners did have a discussion on it, and they were provided with the draft interlocal. They were provided with the draft policies and procedures and that, and it was more of a presentation, and I did not receive any pushback or any major comments. So Commissioner Segerbloom had some discussion about services in lieu and that sort of thing that the county's providing, but beyond that, Commissioner Jones was on the phone and just gave us a brief presentation. The number of questions were minimal.
Is that a presentation item or was it a vote of the commission?
It was a discussion item. It was a direct step towards it.
That was a great summary. As far as the next steps, I think the staff is working to schedule a follow-up meeting on some of the topics. I think background of that board has been, when we talk about consensus, it's been easier to develop consensus when it's kind of a visionary board and it's not, and it doesn't result in like bill drafts that may become mandatory. So I think the idea that there's lobbying, that is a little bit of an area that we've been concerned about. However, under professional services, as we develop those policy issues, it could certainly happen. I think it's just that's where the definition of consensus gets sensitive. If you could end up hiring someone to advocate for a very specific bill or mandate that it somehow, affects one entity in a different way that you wouldn't support, then what do? We end up funding something that could hurt us. But to Councilman's point, which was, we just got to start somewhere. If we, go with professional services, develop the policy platform, and work together to iron out the issues, then that's kind of what our comments are going to end up being on the interlocal. Let's keep it more general, allow the board to do professional services, and then we develop the scope of work and what are the needs and hire a firm through our typical process.
This is Deborah March. Hearing from the leadership from the various cities, what I have heard is that there was a concern about hiring a lobbyist that would maybe represent a position that we each have our own lobbyists and may take a different position on, and where does that put the organization when you're maybe in conflict with what the regional organization is saying as a board, but then your city has a different position on it, and that was a concern that was raised by some of the mayors.
Yeah, and I think it's a healthy conversation at this level as well. Is that there's so many issues to focus on. There's always going to be something that the cities don't agree on, but there's so many issues that really kind of impact quality of life here that there's nobody that's going to address. So all of the things are identified in the SNS plan. It's great that it's within a government structure, but the RTC is not going to be discussing those issues at the RTC board, and they're not presenting them to Las Vegas or North Las Vegas or Henderson. So the conversations remain focused on this group here. And whatever resources we have to push at the federal or state level are within this room or watching on WebEx.
You raise a good question there, and I think maybe having those conversations with this technical group that's looking at the plan going forward, I think will help to regionally update that plan. But then maybe something that needs to travel to each of the municipalities and to different organizations to present to their boards, and there's probably that connection between what RTC can and can't do. I mean, could we do more? If we get a I think a quarterly presentation on Southern Vets with the RTC board.
Let's say approximately quarterly.
Oh, okay. So there probably could be some actions that were taken, but we have not done it up to this point.
And I would say, and I fully support technical working groups and have been a part of many. At the end of the day, if they come to any one of the jurisdictions, it's not a priority of those elected officials. It really doesn't. It's helpful. This is great information, but it won't go anywhere if it's not. And being an elected official, I totally get it, because it's not an issue of the constituents that come to me. So that's the fear of technical working groups is they provide a lot of information, but unless they're forcing the connection between public works and planning and all those other departments. We're missing one.
If I could, for what it's worth, in my experience in dealing with similar things just through the planning process as well as through other regional organizations I've been involved with, you're absolutely right in that it's really important, I think, to sort of build within each stakeholder at the regional level that kind of consensus that can then, so that it's not us, the administrator of the plan, coming around and saying, this is what's important to you. That won't work. But us helping each one of the organizations identify what their priorities are, that's completely within the realm of what does tend to work. And that part, I think, is something that we're definitely ready to do.
I think there's a reason that's where it becomes so difficult is because on the housing issue, the E-Island issue, where those things just, they don't rise to the level of your constituents reaching out to you. It's all those constituents that really don't have a voice in our community. And so our quality of life indicators continue to be at the very bottom because those folks aren't reaching out asking. It's our social service systems that are completely overwhelmed. It's our lack of equitable housing. It's our lack of access to infrastructure for medicine. Those things are continuing to be a lack without a real focus from our state, unfortunately, or our federal government. And so how do we communicate those voices effectively using this data from Southern Nevada Strong to say, here are ways to plug in resources into our community in a variety of different ways, through whichever municipality or jurisdiction is appropriate.
I think this is where it gets back to that discussion we had early on with the SNS and even today. If we had maps that overlaid, so there were tools that were available to us that have the heat island effect, for example, or have housing affordability overlaid on heat islands and transit lines overlaid on that, we start to see, starts to tell us stories about what's happening. It'd be very useful tools for us as well in terms of making some decisions.
And I'll just to comment on that, we've made a number of starts in doing that, but frankly, what has turned into a regular problem is that the online mapping technology has evolved on a fairly rapid cycle recently. And so what we've learned is, you know, we can develop, we put together a planning analysis tool maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And even within about 6 months of us completing that, where we had layers on about all sorts of transportation-related data. So, you know, where the congestion shows up in the system, where crashes have happened, as well as some basic demographics. By the time we had that working, and we were ready to add the updated layers, the software we had used had already been changed by the vendor, and we have to restart the whole process again. So we're continuing to look at it. I mean, this is a constant topic of discussion at the staff level at the RTC about how best to map this, because, you know, we would like to use it for the things that we're doing for Southern Nevada Strong, but we would also like to use it for the transportation planning. I mean, we've mapped health data in the past, because we'd like to be able to look at the projects that are coming in and being proposed funding, to be able just to say, okay, well, you know, this sidewalk is in an area where there's a number of chronic diseases that are associated with less walking, less physical activity. And so you think that they would, you know, there's a logical connection there. But the layers and the technical problem, it's our problem to fix, we're on it, but the technical challenge of trying to get those 2 layers in the same map, and then also show a potential project on there too, has been a challenge. But it's something that we are fully aware of and always trying to work on.
Those are the layers of a technology system, but you also have to translate that
into things that matter.
Into layers of government, because you have to take that heat island and say, okay, what are the associated projects that are going to change, or what are the health impacts, because we want to change that sidewalk structure. We also need to provide for healthy food in that area, which has very little to do with the RTC, but a lot to do with the local government. We need to create additional tax incentives at the state level, or we need the infusion of an opportunity zone or something that's alike from the federal government. All of those things would impact and have an impact on whatever your map shows, but there's no formal structure of getting your map to people who make those decisions.
Yeah, and I also, this may be another area where this idea of a smaller, more focused working group may be able to help identify ways in which we can better message and communicate these concepts and issues out. So that could be helpful.
I wonder if this is a problem that we should take to that Smart Cities Regional Planning Group, that they could talk about what are the technologies of the future that maybe we need to be planning for and plugging into. And I know RTC is a member of that, as well as each of the municipalities in the county, and maybe working with Gartner, who I think they have a contract with, maybe it's a way of identifying what the right technology might be to lay some of this information in, so that we aren't just having to rebuild it every year or every couple of years, but actually be able to move forward with it. And I think the county, you have a pretty robust.
We do, but the interesting thing I was going to bring up is not even necessarily the technology. Even if we keep up with the technology, the way that you look at it and analyze it changes. We have a very robust program to look at gap analysis for our various types of parks. Worked out really well. And then we realized that that's probably not the best way to do it any longer, because it's being done. So you have to take the same data. Nothing has changed on our GIS, but we have to take the same data and reanalyze it in a completely different way. So you're having to reboot your thought process constantly as well.
How you look at this.
And how you look at it.
Yeah, that's a great point, Nancy, because we just went through that with water conservation and making sure that we're reducing turf, and that's not going to help us with urban heat island effect. And so now we've got to figure out how do we go back to those urban neighborhoods that are, in terms of social vulnerability, the most vulnerable. It's for individual physical health, but just overall in terms of community resiliency. Those are the ones that are lacking the tree canopy, the green space, some of the parks, because we didn't have park standards back then. When those neighborhoods were built, most of the ones in Henderson are older, and so now we have to retrofit. So that's a great point. We think that we're doing a good job with water conservation, and now we're going to increase heat islands.
Face another issue. Yeah. Good point. Any other questions or comments from folks who are not in the room? All right, well, we'll go ahead and move on to the next item, which is to designate officers for the 2021 year.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Again, Craig Rayborn, MPO Director for the RTC. So just as a reminder, the RTC's policies and procedures for this steering committee provide that the chair and vice chair will be elected by a majority of the SNS steering committee annually at our October meeting. This is our October meeting, and so we need to go through that process, and then the new chair and vice chair will serve for the following 12 months. Our current chair is Mayor Deborah Marks, representing the Regional Transportation Commission, also obviously the Mayor of Henderson, and our current vice chair is Nancy Amundsen from Clark County Comprehensive Planning Department. With that, I think by tradition I kind of operate this item. So with that, I think I would open it for nominations. So do we have a nomination for chair?
Hello, this is Chad Williams, Executive Director of the Southern Nevada Regional Housing Authority. I'd like to renominate Mayor Deborah March from the City of Henderson to be chair.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And are there, do we have a nomination for vice chair then?
I'll go ahead and nominate Nancy Amundsen to be vice chair.
Okay, thank you. Are there any comments or questions from the committee?
Madam Chair, I would support those.
Okay.
Sorry, Shane Emmerman.
So we have a motion on the floor. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Anyone opposed? Say nay. That motion carries. Thank you very much. The next item is to discuss current activities and priorities related to the implementation of the regional plan.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Again, thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Again, Craig Rayborn, RTC MPO Director. This is a regular item that we have to provide members of the steering committee an opportunity to provide any updates that they might have about activities relating to Southern Nevada Strong plan implementation. And so it's generally an open discussion. I will go ahead and start. I just want to remind or announce to members of the steering committee that the RTC is currently having a public comment period for our Access 2050 Regional Transportation Plan. So it identifies transportation projects from 2021 through 2050. And I'll just note that there is direct linkage in a number of these elements of our RTP to implementing Southern Nevada Strong Plan. One of those themes of Southern Nevada Strong is increasing transportation choices. And so that's a factor that we used in developing the plan. I'll also note that the plan incorporates by reference all of the onboard recommendations, although there's not funding for those. It's the starting point of including them as unfunded projects, and that plan, the onboard plan, directly implemented more than 30 elements of the Southern Nevada Strong Plan. Sorry, Lisa. It addressed a whole bunch of the projects under the theme. I don't want to go into the numbers, but yeah, it's a bunch of projects under theme. So that's really on Monday, and we'll continue continue through Wednesday, November 25th. If anyone wants to review the plan, any of the appendices, provide comments, look at the projects on a map and provide comments on individual projects, all of that is available at the RTC's website, rtc.com/access2050.
Thank you. Thank you. What we'll do is we'll go around the room here and see if anyone has comments, and then we'll go to, Maren will go down the list of folks to see if they have comments as well. So, Lisa, do you have anything?
Sure. Lisa Corona, Steve Henderson. We have really been focused on recovery planning for the last 9 months or so, and actually looked at the regional plan for some of those strategies, since the impacts of this pandemic really do affect our vulnerable communities. And so it was kind of an opportunity to revisit some of the strategies that helped during that recession when the Southern Nevada Strong Regional Plan was initially adopted. So we developed a recovery plan that really emphasizes vulnerable communities. We also submitted an application for the Choice Neighborhood Grant with the Southern Nevada Regional Housing Authority, which we haven't heard back yet, but hoping, because these resources do help us implement our plans. We are also in the process of updating our development code, and several of the strategies that were identified in the regional plan and then what we customized and updated our comprehensive plan with are being addressed in our code update. Urban agriculture, connectivity, trans-oriented development, and some of the form-based code kind of principles. Those are all being incorporated in our code update. Those are some of the highlights. We're also, what I mentioned previously about working with the UNLV Boys School. We did a research project with Echo Northwest on inclusionary housing and how we would apply in inclusionary housing, whether it was voluntary or mandatory policy at the city, and took some of that research and trying to engage a wider group of stakeholders in that by working with UNLV and getting some of the legal background that those law students will have to help us consider options into the future. Thank you.
Was there some discussion about the inclusionary zoning being a regional discussion item? Because it seems like one municipality really can't move out with that without it really being a regional.
That's right, Mayor. That's one of the reasons why we look to UNLV, and I know SNS is also doing research on that. And what I think the market analysis and some of the strategies can happen at a regional level, but implementing a policy like that eventually will become a local thing because of the real estate market is so unique in each neighborhood, even whether it would work with certain development types in certain communities because of the impact on real estate costs and things like that. So it's one of those opportunities that we can work together at the regional level on the policy and how we enable it, and then how you apply it and where and what incentives you use could all happen at the local level. So it's one of those nice opportunities.
Thank you. Brian?
Just a quick question. What mechanism do you use to work at the regional level for housing?
Well, I think we have options. You mean organizationally?
How do you do it at a regional level with housing? Because it's something that we're thinking about at the city of Las Vegas.
Okay.
I just don't know what the linkage between the municipalities and zoning ordinances are.
Well, starting with a market analysis to understand where are we underserved in terms of our supply, like which price point basically. So then we know, like in Henderson, for example, we're underserved by 11,000 units over the next 20 years, I think, at the price point between $900 and $1,100 a month. So knowing that's how many units we have demand for, so we do a regional market analysis, and then you figure out what slice of that pie can your community accommodate, and where's that demand? And then now how do we generate those units? So I think getting the stakeholder buy-in happens at the regional level, understanding the market analysis happens at the regional level. The reason why it's hard to do then at the local level in a similar way is because our land use and zoning is different, and the real estate dynamics of individual communities is different. So what you might be able to do on Boulder Highway would be different than what you could do in West Henderson, for example. So it's going to be a bigger subsidy depending on where you implement it and how. So
the policy and the concept should be similar no matter where, so.
But but it's just that the subsidy would be much greater. So for example, if you wanted to try to implement a net zero policy, you would focus on multifamily primarily. But if you're really trying to generate more entry-level single-family home ownership, then you would need a lot more subsidy. So those issues might be different. Like in a community that's more dense, you might be comfortable having that kind of density. In a community that is looking for more entry-level home ownership, you might implement that in a different way.
Is your market analysis for the region available, or is it just in Henderson?
So Applied Analysis did that for Nevada Hand a couple of years ago at the regional level. So we just used that same methodology and updated it just for Henderson. We can share that. I'm sure SNS has it too. It might be a couple of years old now.
And I'm sure that would be useful to the merchant builders who actually do work regionally. They work across the valley. If we tell them what we need in our neighborhoods, they're going to be the ones that are going to be implementing it to some degree. Maybe not as much on the affordable side unless we work with Nevada Hand or one of the folks who are building the affordable piece. But even merchant builders who can build different products, different lines. Like we're working with the Molaski group, and we've given them some incentives to be able to convert some of their apartment units in market rate apartments to affordable apartments.
So that information, however you choose to share it, I think is very applicable to other jurisdictions.
I'll just take that, but please go ahead.
I'm sorry. So specifically the market analysis, I knew Nevada Hand had been engaged with Applied Analysis and doing a market analysis. I don't know if they broke it out into jurisdictions.
They didn't. That's why we paid to have it done just for us.
So the other components that are interesting are the incentive packages. So if you mentioned you're working with Molaski Group, what are those incentive packages? That if there's parity within the region, then it doesn't become so.
Absolutely. We should all be helping each other on these issues.
And it applies directly to me in the area that I represent right now, and with the City of Las Vegas master plan, because I'll be going through a major rezoning, primarily along the Charleston and Sahara corridors, which are directly related to the work that Craig and his group are doing in the RTC, as Charleston is one of the most heavily impacted corridors. So that changed the zoning in the Charleston corridor in particular, allowing for greater density, understanding what the incentive packages that other municipalities are using. So that regional approach is super important.
Nancy?
So as I noted earlier, we're working on an initiative, and it's probably one of the first in Southern Nevada where you work on your master plan. We're rewriting the master plan and following, actually concurrently, a little after we're rewriting our entire zoning code. So it's Transform Clark County, transformclarkcounty.com. Tomorrow is the closing of our second set of survey questions. So if you go on there and you want to take a survey, you're more than welcome. If you're in the city, because we want to find out what everybody's thoughts are. The survey isn't as wide open, shall we say, as the first one we did, but we do appreciate anybody that gets on and answers the questions. Within the next few months, we're going to be coming out with another survey, more to do with the zoning code. But we've been working with our regional partners. During the pandemic, it's very hard, so most of our meetings are Zoom meetings. Our consultants have come in and provide presentations to the Planning Commission and the Board of County Commissioners. But we're probably will be releasing in the next 2 weeks our policies, our high-level policies, and that's through a lot of our stakeholder meetings, which have been going on the entire time we've been in this pandemic. And we've had a very robust group of people that have been involved. And the one thing that I noticed on the spreadsheet that we were provided, a lot of what we're doing addresses a lot of the initiatives that they had in Southern Nevada Strong. That, along with our sustainability and climate initiative that we're doing through Marcy's group, and we also are doing economic development studies, which the county has never really been that involved. We always felt that any work goes in the county is absolutely fine, so if the cities want to compete, that's great. But now we're coming up with our own economic development plan, redevelopment plan, because we do have some areas that are in real need of redevelopment. All of that being noted, we are 40% forging ahead, trying to look at opportunities for affordable housing. The county rezoned 10 parcels about a year and a half ago to high-density residential for multifamily. Those parcels were ones that we had reserved for affordable housing, so we're working through them because, as you know, we have to work with DINLV and we have to work with HUD, so those will be multifamily for rent properties. In addition, I'm working on an initiative for a affordable housing, 80% or less AMI, no subsidies, for sale housing in unincorporated Clark County. When I can release that, I will let everyone know how that's going to work, because it looks like if all the numbers come together, someone at 80% or less of AMI might just be able to afford some homes. And we're looking at 150 homes in a neighborhood in the middle of another neighborhood. So, and what we're looking at are amenities and that sort of thing. So that's kind of exciting, because every
school teachers.
Probably my daughter, right? No, but because she's a school teacher. But I always look at it, if we can get those folks in the 60 to 80% AMI out of rental into their own homes, that opens up those properties for other folks that will not be able to afford a house on their own, but they can move up and it goes down the line. Then the next group can move up, and the next group can move up, because we're finding that a lot of the folks that are in, let's say the 60%, are in housing that is a lot less than they need to be able to afford, but they have nowhere to go. They don't have that next step up. So it's, continuum of care is the term that most county uses. So we're trying.
Yeah, you're setting people up to be sustainable now.
Exactly. We've gone up to Fort Collins, Colorado. Their Habitat for Humanity is working on some really good initiatives similar to this. So
great. Wonderful. And that is transformclarkcounty.com?
Yes, transformclarkcounty.com.
So if folks want to weigh in on the plan,
they can. And they can, even if they don't do the survey, if they want to leave comments, if they want to email, anything they want, any comments they want to make, they come to, our consultants have access to the Clark County, .com. If you go onto that website and you email us, it goes to our consultant, but it also goes to myself and then Mary and Sammy, so we all get to see the comments that are coming in.
Thank you. Shane?
Well, the Conservation District is looking to finish up the resource needs assessment. I think we were before this board a year ago, perhaps, did a presentation. Unfortunately, I think like with most everybody else, the pandemic has really kind of slowed us down. One of our programs, the Chuckle Pumpkin, that was really kind of taking hold that we've done for the last couple of years, for community providers to come out with their pumpkins after Halloween and put them in truck J and shoot them off. That's obviously been on hold as well. So hopefully, things can get a little bit more on track next year, perhaps. So we can get that going again. But yeah, I think right now, the only thing really to report is that, finishing up that resource needs assessment by the end of the year. So
thank you. And then, Erin, can we go down the list of who's on?
Yeah. Next up is Mike Casey with the school district. Do you have anything to report to us?
Certainly over the summer months and early fall, our focus has been on getting our kids connected and putting them in the best position to operate within the distant environment. We evaluate the health statistics daily, and planning has been ongoing to get to a point at which we can bring our kids back in some form, face-to-face instruction. But a lot of work being done continuously over the summer, and as mentioned, into the early fall, and we'll continue those efforts.
Is your school meeting next to discuss that?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Is the Or is the school board going to be meeting this next month to have that conversation about returning kids to school maybe the first of the year?
We have been providing updates to the board for the last, I believe the last two board meetings. The one upcoming will be of an action item of a vote, so it'll be determined as far as if they receive or provide approval, if we can return to a hybrid model. Certainly timing on that would be contingent on the health statistics, but yes, that'll be up for a vote this upcoming board meeting.
Thank you. Maybe you should provide an update the next time we meet. Hopefully we'll have kids back. Thank you.
All right, next up we have Dylan Goldberg from the City of North Las Vegas. Dylan?
Hi, everyone. Yes, hi. Thank you so much. I'll echo what a lot of people said. I really appreciate the work of staff and everybody on the committee to put together these priorities. And it's been interesting during the pandemic. That's obviously been our focus for much of the last year, as others have said. But it highlights the priorities and the work of SNS in really shining a light on some of the inequalities in our community and the needs of our community. And, you know, we've been really focused at pumping the CARES money we did receive from the county into those needs. And I think that's going to continue, and it brought into laser focus where we need to focus, and where we've been focusing is working. And so we'll have more to share in the future, but exciting stuff coming. We're just trying to get through the thick of 2020. So thank you all.
Thank you.
All right, next up I have Jim Keene from the City of Boulder City.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Dane Marshall from the Water District.
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of the committee. This is my first meeting, so I'm excited to be part of the this effort. I'll speak to both the district and SNWA updates. So for SNWA, we completed an integrated resource planning advisory committee process. It's approximately a year-long process in August. A number of recommendations that focused on capital improvements and conservation initiatives were approved by our board of directors in September. As a result of those recommendations, we're bringing a major capital construction plan to our board in November. And we have an internal conservation strategic plan that we will begin to implement early next year to focus on those conservation recommendations. We will also bring an updated water resource plan to our board of directors in November. The community is 192 days now without measurable rain, and our overall water demands are 1.5% over the average of the last 3 years. Water conservation and diligent management of our resources is extremely important to the sustainability of our community over the long term. And it will take a community effort to achieve the objectives regarding conservation. So it's going to take all of us. So I ask you to please help out with that effort. And don't forget to change your clocks on Sunday, November 1, to the winter watering schedule, which is 1 day a week and never on Sundays. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next up is MJ Maynard for the RTC.
I think MJ has stuff.
Okay, and then we are moving on to Sandra. Are you still on the line? Anything from NDOT?
Hi, good afternoon. We just look forward to continuing to work with all of you on these initiatives. There may be an opportunity, as I mentioned, to bring in some other state agencies, such as NDEP and the Governor's Office of Energy, as we work on some of those sustainability issues. I'm happy to be a conduit, but bringing them in might help with some of those analyses and initiatives. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
All right, and next I have Robert Summerfield from City of Las Vegas.
So for the City of Las Vegas, we're hitting hopefully you can hear me, We're hitting the end of our process for a new comprehensive plan for the city. In fact, if you go to masterplan.vegas online, you can see the public comment draft of that. We've been receiving quite a few comments. We've been incorporating those things that we can that are appropriate to make changes based on some of those comments. We actually anticipate to go to Planning Commission next month on the 8th for our Planning Commission to hold a public hearing on the policies and objectives of the plan with an item to go before our City Council in December for them to ratify, again, assuming our Planning Commission adopts the plan, for our City Council to ratify that Planning Commission adoption of the master plan. With quite a bit of work to then follow in the new year. We want to be very methodical in the adoption of the new land use map. So we will be doing some additional work after the new year on that. We're working very closely with several of our more urban wards on addressing big box infill projects. The city is identified as one of our most substantial development opportunities over the next 30 years, as we've exhausted quite a bit of our larger greenfield spaces over the previous 20 years, that our development is going to be internal, not growing outward any longer, and it's going to be a lot of redevelopment of either underutilized or previously just never developed leapfrog, or areas where leapfrog development occurred, where we have some smaller tracts of land, but have never actually seen development, but are nestled right in the heart of a bunch of infrastructure amenities. So that's what we're working on, specific to SNS and the regional plan. This morning, the councilman, as well as others, we're at the groundbreaking for the new UNLV School of Medicine. That's a huge component of the medical district opportunity site, as well as a substantial catalytic project for the medical district and the downtown master plan effort. So we continue to move forward with those efforts and help assist additional development that's complementary and builds off of those activities that we're seeing in some of our downtown districts. Thank you.
Thank you. Perhaps at a future meeting, you could, as you're doing your research, kind of fill us in on the big box efforts and what you're working on to do some of this infill development, because I think all of our municipalities in the county, for sure, are all dealing with these issues, so that would be valuable for us.
Absolutely, Mayor. We'll be more than happy to share the research that we're doing right now into some best management processes that exist out there, not trying to recreate the wheel, but adapt to our unique environment, some of those things that are being done in other communities. So absolutely, we will be happy to share that with the team.
Thank you.
All right, next up I have Chad Williams with the Southern Nevada Regional Housing Authority. Chad.
Good afternoon, everyone. So we have a few things going on at the Housing Authority. So first, just with dealing with COVID-19 like everyone else, we have provided free T-Mobile hotspots to all of our individuals in our programs, whether public, affordable, or Section 8, so that those children can ensure that their distant learning is going uninterrupted. We entered into an expanded partnership with the Nevada Youth Network, so that we can provide after-school programs for children that may have some challenges in the distance learning, to increase the number of affordable housing units here in the Valley. We've issued an RFP for about a 15-acre site at 28th and Cedar. We've received 2 responses for that site. The next RFP will be going out will be for a similar acreage site that is vacant at 28th and Sunrise, and that's in line with the City of Las Vegas master plan, filling in some of those infield unutilized land. Last month, our board finally formalized a master development agreement to demolish and redevelop our Marble Manor public housing site, which is right there on Washington, between Washington and Bonanza, and Martin Luther King Jr. And next week, hopefully the city will approve a MOU that our board approved last week that will pave the way for our agency to acquire the Moulin Rouge site, which has been sitting vacant. That's right there, continuous to our Marble Manor. The Moulin Rouge site is about 4 parcels. 2 of those parcels we envision of placing mixed use, mixed income, affordable housing on that site. 1 parcel we would look to relocate our housing authority offices. We're looking to relocate, obviously, because of we sit under the 95 overpass. And so we've been informed by NDOT that they will be expanding that overpass over our site. So we will be getting evicted. And so that allows us to consolidate our offices on our Maryland Avenue campus and Flamingo Road onto the Moulin Rouge site, and then demolish and redevelop our Flamingo Road office site into some more housing. And that site is right across the street from, I forgot the casino, large casino right there on Flamingo Road. And then last, I just want to give an announcement and let everybody know that we have 2 key positions that we're going to be recruiting for over the fall into the spring. Next month, our Housing Authority Board of Commissioners will be approving for us to, after almost a decade, to have our own in-house general counsel. And then I'll be recruiting for an assistant executive director for policy and planning to have more of an impact on some of the regional housing issues that we are all challenged with. So if you have any ideas or anybody that wants to come work for me, let me know. That's my report.
Thank you. And then last, I have Robert Fielden on the line. Do you have something to share with us? Rob?
Okay. Thank you. Thank you all for the comments. Next item will be the discussion of future agenda items for possible action. Do we have some items that folks would like to see discussed in the future? Maybe just some updates on the plans that people are updating, like the county's plan and City of Las Vegas' plan. It might be good to hear.
Yeah, Mayor, we'll reach out to all the agencies that we know are working on current notable plans like that to see if they're right for another update to this group.
And then status report of some of the things RTC.
Of course, our project, yes.
Perfect. Any other items? Okay. This is the time now set aside to conduct the final citizen participation public comment period. Is there anyone wishing to speak? Let's go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ken McDonald, MAC, DONAFB. Newfield, Environmental Consulting, day job, Chairman of the Towards Council and former committee member of Southern Mass Strong. And strong advocate for all the things that you're doing to make our community more livable, sustainable, economically vibrant. And Craig, I was a relentless advocate for prioritizing. There were like 312 good things to do. And hopefully I give this number 13, and hopefully we're just top of the list. So right after the shutdown, a group of us got together, concerned citizens, and cobbled together a group called Restoration Nevada. And the members, Joe W. Brown, who was an attorney, former gaming commissioner, former athletic commissioner, former White House appointee, former Governor Bob Lewis, former county commissioner, Bruce Woodbury, active council member, Southington, Tina Quigley, former RTC, and also a member of this committee. And so we ended up putting together, recognizing that COVID kills people. It's also killing businesses. And so with these businesses and community leaders, put together a list of recommendations, actually a detailed presentation for the governor on restoration and recovery roadmap. And most recently, actually, 2 days ago, we had a member come up with some new things to do. And also think of a new deal that had programs that had literally tens of thousands of jobs And so we know COVID is killing people and jobs, and also the opportunity for people to have a place that's livable, vibrant, economically sustainable. And so this program is something we intend to present to Southern Land Strong, and see if it's, some of these programs are going to be, they're 10,000 jobs, that's a lot of dollars, which means federal. And so we'll be submitting recommendations to this group for consideration and ideally action.
Thank you very much, Tim.
I know I had 3 minutes, I'm trying to do it too.
Thank you. Any other comments, any other public feedback? Anyone online? Seeing that, we'll go ahead and close this meeting. This meeting is adjourned.